Well, I think the title is interesting and important. Of course, it's a adaptation of what you can find in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where it's, is it Brutus to, I forget, is it Brutus to Cassius or vice versa? The fault, I think, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. And there he's drawing attention to, our own moral responsibility. Stop blaming the fates and all that. But I think as I read one of John Green's interviews, he's saying, look, let's face it, sometimes the fault really isn't our stars. Sometimes there's plenty of fault to go around where you say, I didn't do this. You get these two teenage kids dying of cancer. They didn't do something to make that happen. It's in the stars. It's in the fates, So I think it's just a way of playfully reversing Shakespeare to say, well, sometimes it really is just the way the ball bounces. Nature is grim, and life can be grim. And I think Christians can certainly handle that. It's ingredient sometimes in the structure of the world that it just throws tough stuff at us. Yeah, well, the trajectory of the incarnation, so it's a downward trajectory. Though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not deem equality with God a thing to be grasped at, but rather emptied himself and took the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of men, Paul says. So just the move of coming into our flesh is a self-emptying, it's a downward move. But then Paul goes on. He was known to be of human estate, and it was thus that he humbled himself, obediently accepting even death on a cross. And for someone in Paul's time, there'd be no death worse, no imaginable scenario worse than death on a cross. So the point is, the Son of God has gone all the way down to the very bottom of human suffering, into meaninglessness, into undeserved suffering, into pain that is inexplicable. See? So all the very things that this movie talks about, two good kids who are dying of cancer. I mean, that makes no sense. It just seems to be the worst kind of suffering. Yeah, it is. It is. And that's where God went. And the Sacred Heart, it's like the breast of Jesus opened up to reveal his suffering heart. It's the raison d'etre of the incarnation. That's what it's all about. And that's where this story takes place. That's where they come together. The aegis of it is the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And I think that is really vital for understanding what's going on in this story. Deeper than any philosophical schema would be this claim. And see, that's why God's incarnation doesn't take away suffering, but it changes it permanently. It changes suffering because God accepted it, and therefore suffering can become a route of access to God. I think that's what's key in Christianity. We don't find an explanation. The book of Job, I think, remains in place, that God doesn't give an explanation, but he changes it permanently by the incarnation. I'm very intrigued by the sort of ambiguity around the Sacred Heart in the movie, because it is true that it's presented in this sort of twee way. The guy rolls out the carpet, and there's a kind of sentimental portrait of it. And then his language, we're all meeting in literally in the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And the kids, typical kind of teenagers, dismiss all this. That it does name something very real, namely that Christianity is being very poorly presented in the world today by people like this well-meaning but kind of dweeby and clueless minister. And then a lot of people, especially young people, will just say, oh, Christianity, what does that have to say about anything? It's just an old trite cliche or something. So I think that's really right, that the movie notices that and says, yeah, that's the case. Nevertheless, that they met precisely there. I think it does have a sort of implicit symbolic value throughout the story. And that when you get beyond the sort of treacly sentimentalization of the Sacred Heart, you get something very profound. And what these kids are entering into, the very deep experience of suffering, well, that's a way in. That's a way into Christianity, because we have a suffering God. Not a God that's indifferent to our suffering or hovering above it or offering blithe explanations for it, but a God who becomes suffering love. So I think the both and quality of that is eloquent in the movie. Yes, the Sacred Heart is dismissed as superficial sentimentalism, but you plumb the depths of the Sacred Heart, you'll get right to the heart of the matter, pun intended.